Slowly it rises.
The Lincoln Addict, back with another listing review. This one will be a little interesting. I would suggest if you have an opportunity, visit my website, lincolnaddict.com. There are ways how to listen to the podcast. I certainly appreciate the support. Now, I know I've slowed down just a tad on doing these listing reviews. I do still have a few deep dives that I plan to go through for the upcoming auctions at the end of this month, but I wanted to actually come back and circle back on this car, which has been for sale before. We'll take a look at it, and we will do a deep dive on if this car is something you could see yourself restoring. Is it an opportunity to get in at a great deal and restore a Lincoln, especially a convertible? We'll talk about that from beginning to end. But basically, it's a 66 Lincoln Continental Convertible. And what I want to do is show you the current Hagerty evaluation tool. So the 66 and 67 are very similar, as I've talked about in the past, and we've continued to see those prices go up. And you either love or kind of hate the 66, 67 models, especially the convertibles. I'm actually a big fan of them. I owned a 67 sedan, and I really like the body style. Now, I understand there's a lot of people that love the 61 through 3. There's the guys like me in the middle, 4s and 5s, that are really our top, favorites. And then the 6s and 7s, which I can also go with my favorite because I love those years. But basically, this is what you're at. A fair condition convertible is right now $25,000, $26,000. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through this. Now, the listing details, I am going to go back to eBay, but basically we see that it's a 66 Lincoln Continental Convertible. We know it's a 66 based upon the bar count and the grille, as well as this star, which has the tip broken off, amongst other things on this car. So we know it's the 66 model. Again, if you were to compare this to a 67, it's very, very similar. You can ignore the second bullet point. I think that was a copy-paste error. There is a 462 in this car, okay? The bottom line is a restoration is needed. So if we look back at eBay, we see the current bid $1,500 with 17 bids and a buy it now price of $4,500. The car is in Magnolia, Texas. When we scroll down here, as you may be accustomed to seeing, or maybe you're an eBay user, basically you don't get a lot. And this is why I like Bring a Trailer, because Bring a Trailer will then, basically break down this VIN number for you and kind of go through and give you a lot more detail. Unfortunately here, there's no kind of hand-holding service, if you will, kind of like Bring a Trailer. So it's whatever the seller enters. So basically we see it's a 4-door convertible. They provide the VIN again. The car has been parked since 76. So almost, 50 years. Like all convertibles that have sat, it needs floors replaced. And it goes on to say, of course, trying to say, hey, you can get the floors for $800, so on and so forth. There's not a lot of information here. Basically just trying to kind of say, hey, looking to punt the car, and here's the information that I've got. Now, if we go back to our slides, to kind of keep us on track here, I checked the Lincoln registry, and this car, this is the search. So you enter in the VIN, copy, paste, and it was entered back in March. So the gentleman that runs this, he does a really good job. Anytime he's scouring these auctions or Craigslist or whatnot, he or someone, I believe it's him often, will go and enter the VIN. That's one way to kind of track these cars the best we can. So it was entered back in March. What that tells us, when we click on this link, basically it said that it was for sale in Magnolia, Texas. What that tells me as a buyer, basically this was, 5-6 months ago. So we know this person's been trying to sell it. It gives you a little bit more leverage, I guess, to a certain extent. It's been sitting. We really have no information on the VIN plate because, unfortunately, the seller of this car obviously hasn't been watching the channel. Really, there needs to be a photo of the VIN plate. Is it still there? If it's not, that's worrisome. But basically, here's what we have. We know it's a 66. And then, it's the 51,438th made that for that model year. The VIN plate, again, don't have that info. Now, the pros of this listing. So let's jump back to eBay. If we were looking at the pros of this car, I know many of you are going, really, is there a pro? Number one, it does appear to be, at first glance, kind of a complete car. So that's going to be a win, depending on, what you're looking for. They do mention it has a built 462. However, unfortunately, it's not really a pro. It doesn't come with the auction. Apparently, it's a separate auction, although I looked at the seller's other items and do not see anything. And then, of course, I will throw this out there. I know it's a stretch for some, especially in the luxury car genre, if you will. It does have a cool patina to it. So if that was your thing, I know cars that sit in Arizona and Texas and things like that, drier climates, they tend to end up with a cooler patina. However, I understand most people are not going to roll with that. Now, we can see down here in this door area, it does look like there's a hole or some rust there. We can obviously see there's no convertible top, so that's long gone. So that means any bad weather, of course, was getting into this car. The other challenging thing is if we got 3, 6, 9, 15 or so photos, right? That's not a lot. And unfortunately, that's all we have. So if we look back here at some of the things I noticed, bottom line is there's going to be a full restoration needed. The floor pans are shot. The battery tray area we need to look at. We can't see inside the trunk. Okay, so let's look at this second photo. What do we glean from it? Again, you've got the patina. The front bumper looks pretty good. I mean, typically a car in bad condition is going to have a lot more dents. So that's a good thing. We'll talk about maybe what the idea is there. We could see these bumpers in the back typically are going to be pretty nice, but if depending on where it's sat, this is a pretty bad one. There's no getting around. This is going to have to be re-chromed. We can see there's a hole here in the deck lid. These deck lids get very expensive. And as I covered in the last Lincoln Addict podcast, the differences in the sedan versus the convertibles is the convertible has a different deck lid. So what that means is you can't just go buy a deck lid wherever you find one. You have to get one for a convertible, and they're getting harder to find. We do see that it has the trailer hitch, which we'll see again. And, of course, it is missing a peak molding, which those are, you can get those. What we're seeing here in this next photo is a little bit, this all looks good, this front fender area. All this really kind of for the most part looks good, just very, very dingy. We'll go to the next photo here showing the bumper end. You can see this is smashed in. Okay, a lot of work that we're going to have to do on a car like this. We can see here there's a big smash in the back and just more of what we've kind of seen so far. We can see back here, it looks like there's rust in the, again, this is kind of called the dog leg, if you will, on older cars, especially on the Lincolns. That's, that area, that section. We can see here, again, pretty rough back in this corner with this big, this is going to have to be replaced, body panels. You can't just buy the body panels. You have to get them from Lincoln Land or someone like that. We can see this is pretty rough, really rough in here. All of this stuff is gone. As far as the top material, new wiring would be needed. These door pods, boxes, if you will, is kind of what I refer to them as. These get very expensive. They are reproduced. They're made out of like a plastic material and they tend to break. Now, I know that's the least of your worries, but if you were looking at buying a car like this and restoring it, you're going to have a lot of money. I'm talking a lot of money in it just to buy all the pieces to replace some of the bad stuff. Again, here doesn't look very good. There's a lot going on. We can see with some surface rust and whatnot, potentially more, but certainly this thing has been sitting a long time. The engine would have to be pulled, in my opinion. You could probably get it running with it sitting in there, but I mean, to detail it, I mean, there's a lot going on in here. Who knows if the hood was closed all this time, was water getting in here, leaves, things like that. This area, another reason why I'm doing this review is I want you to know I often talk about this. My friend TC has talked about this in the past when I chat with her. Looking underneath the battery tray is an important thing. Typically, old batteries, they might tend to leak some acid and things like that. This is kind of the norm for a car that's been sitting out a very, very long time. This little tray here unbolts. This could come out pretty easy, and you can actually replace all of this here. There's kind of like a pan, and it's very similar to the Mustang pan, where the actual battery tray, if you will, sits, but definitely crusty, I think is the word that comes to mind. We could see this photo, not the best photo, the side of the transmission here, and not really showing us much. That's the least of our worries. This is a photo that I would definitely want to see. I wish we could see more of this. These floor pans, as he mentioned in the write-up, these are bad. I mean, these are pretty bad, and you start getting into a unibody car that needs to have all this done, it's a lot. And I know you could go, well, Jay, it looks pretty solid here. Yeah, a lot of times this thick metal here is pretty solid. But if I look over here, it's kind of hard to tell if that's pavement or if that's just something laying there. But certainly, the holes in the floor and things like that, this could still be structurally sound, could be. But look right here at the bottom of the door. That's nasty, right? I mean, that's a lot of stuff, so that's going to have to be redone. Here, kind of the same that we saw on the other side. The deck lid is not perfectly aligned. What that kind of tells me is at some point people were putting their fingers in here trying to get into the trunk. It's just not aligned. Someone probably did some manual stuff to get in. And then lastly, we do see it has the trailer hitch, but again, you start to see this is thick, heavy chrome bumper. And when it starts to get holes in it like this in these sections, I mean, that's telling me the bumper's probably going to have to be replaced. So I say all that. The reason why I wanted to review this one, and I tried to do it a little quicker, is you can get in at a lower price. If you had $4,500 right now that was burning a hole in your pocket, you could have a convertible. Okay, you'd have to obviously have it shipped to where you're at. But the thing I always tell people is get the nicest car that you can start with. Okay, if we go back to the Haggerty prices, and we go, well, Jason, I could get a fair condition one that I could start up and drive home for, let's say, 20 or 25, 26,000. You go, okay, well, and your buddy goes, well, I can get one for $4,500. Okay. Start making phone calls and figuring out how much it would cost just to get the parts to bring this thing back up to running, driving, and stopping. Okay. All new brake lines. All new fuel lines, probably a new gas tank, carburetor has to be rebuilt, engine maybe has to be pulled depending on how much madness is going on. You start to add all of that up, and the difference, in my opinion, from this, we'll call it $5,000 to where the Haggerty evaluation, you're easily going to pass $20,000 in parts, maybe alone, but parts, rechroming stuff, the metal fab, the labor, the mechanical and stuff. You could buy this car and maybe put $50,000 in, okay, and have a nice driver. Okay, so then you have $55,000 plus your shipping. Look at where these cars are starting to top out, right? $55,000 is a good condition. So then I would argue and say, well, why don't you just go buy a really, really, really nice $55,000 car now and save yourself all that headache? So again, that's a very high level slicing and dicing in the numbers. Certainly, I'm sure there's people out there that have bought a Vert recently for $10,000 and put a few grand in it and they're enjoying it. Certainly, but this one is a little too far gone. You might even have someone that's like a parts person that's going to come in and possibly try to get this. I don't think anyone in their right mind would try to restore a car to this level, unless it was something like a dignitary owned it, a president, if there was some historical value to it. I mean, just these pieces alone with the broken upper and the bottom, they cost a good amount just for that one little emblem, okay? Let alone everything this one needs. Thank you so much for the support. Stay on the rise. Check out Lincoln Addict Podcast, however you listen to podcasts. ODB, have a safe weekend.